The first time I called Ivy Marsh too selective, she was sitting cross-legged on her brother's kitchen counter, scrolling through a dating app with the focused disdain of a woman auditing tax fraud. Swipe left, I said, leaning over her shoulder with a beer I hadn't asked permission to open. Swipe left. Swipe left. Why is he holding a fish? Men who hold fish are hiding something, Ivy said, not looking up. Usually a personality. You've rejected 11 guys in 4 minutes. 12. You miscounted because you were narrating. I'm Wyatt Hale, 26 years old, a structural engineer at a mid-size firm in Portland, which meant I spent my days making sure buildings didn't fall down and my evenings pretending that was a personality trait worth bringing to parties. I had known Ivy for 3 years, ever since her brother Theo, my best friend since college, my roommate for 2 of those years, the man responsible for roughly 40% of my worst decisions, had brought her to a barbecue and introduced her as the sister who thinks she's funnier than me. She still is. That's part of the problem. That night in Theo's kitchen, I watched her reject a 13th man for having, in her words, main character energy in a supporting character's face, and something in me just came out. You're impossible, I said. You're the most selective person I've ever met. Ivy finally looked up. She had dark hair that never quite behaved, a habit of tucking one leg under herself when she sat, and eyes that could go from warm to lethal in half a second depending on what you just said. That night, they went lethal. Selective, she repeated, like she was trying the word on to see if it fit. Painfully. Clinically. Somebody should study you. She set the phone face down on the counter, which I had learned over 3 years of knowing her meant I was about to lose an argument I hadn't realized I was having. You want to know why I'm selective, Wyatt? Desperately. I selected you 3 years ago. The kitchen didn't get quiet in some cinematic way. Theo's dishwasher kept humming. Somewhere in the living room, the television was playing a rerun nobody was watching. But everything in me went very, very still, the way a building goes still right before you find out whether the load calculations were right. What? I said, because apparently that was the best I could do. Ivy blinked, and something crossed her face that looked almost like panic wearing her regular expression as a disguise. Nothing. Forget it. You don't get to say something like that, and then tell me to forget it. That's not how sentences work. It's exactly how sentences work. I invented the rule just now. Ivy. Wyatt. We stood there, 3 feet apart in her brother's kitchen, both of us clearly aware that something had just cracked open and neither of us sure who was supposed to reach into it first. Then Theo walked in wearing sweatpants and holding a bag of chips like a man who had no idea he'd just interrupted the most important 30 seconds of my adult life. Why does it smell like tension in here? He said, not really asking. It's the queso, Ivy said instantly. It's aggressive queso. Theo squinted at both of us, shrugged in the specific way of a man who has decided investigating further would only ruin his evening, and wandered back to the couch with his chips. Ivy exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the barbecue 3 years ago. We're not talking about that, she said. We're absolutely talking about that. Not tonight. Fine, I said. But I'm writing it down somewhere so you can't pretend it didn't happen. She picked her phone back up, swiped left on a man holding a snake, and said, without looking at me, you can write it wherever you want. It's true either way. I didn't sleep well that night. I want to be clear about that, because everything before this story makes it sound like I'd been pining silently for 3 years, brave and tragic, like some kind of engineering-themed Victorian novel. That's not quite it. It's messier than that. It's 3 years of small collisions I kept explaining away. Ivy and I met at that first barbecue, and within an hour she'd told me my grilling technique was aggressively mediocre, and I'd told her that was rich coming from someone whose contribution to the meal was a bag of chips she hadn't even opened. We argued about condiments for 20 minutes. Theo eventually had to physically separate us to keep the hot dogs from burning. After that, she became a fixture. Not a girlfriend, not even really a friend in the beginning, more like weather. Ivy showed up at Theo's apartment on Sunday afternoons with takeout and a list of complaints about her week, and somehow I was always there, And somehow I always ended up being the one she complained to while Theo fell asleep on the couch halfway through. She was 23 then, working her way up at a marketing firm downtown, living in a studio apartment with a cactus she'd named Gerald and consistently forgot to water. I learned things about her the way you learn a building's quirks, not all at once, but through small repeated exposure. She hummed when she was nervous and didn't know she did it. She cried at dog commercials, but stayed dry-eyed through actual sad movies, which she claimed was a control thing. She kept a running list in her phone of every terrible date she'd been on, titled, without irony, evidence. She learned things about me too, that I over-explained when I was anxious, that I always ordered the same thing at restaurants because decision fatigue was real and I refused to pretend otherwise, that I once cried during a bridge inspection because the bridge reminded me of one my grandfather used to walk me across, and she never once made fun of me for it, which somehow made it worse, because it meant she saw me and decided not to use it as ammunition. Somewhere in the second year, I stopped being able to pretend the thing I felt when she walked into a room was ordinary. Somewhere in the third year, I stopped being able to pretend I didn't notice when she left one. There was a specific afternoon in the second year I still think about more than I probably should. Ivy had locked herself out of her apartment during a work trip mishap involving a lost bag and a dead phone, and I was the only person she could reach from a borrowed charger at the airport, because Theo was out of town and her roommate was unreachable. I drove 40 minutes to let her into her own building with the spare key Theo kept in a drawer for emergencies, and when she opened the door and saw me standing there at 11 at night, holding a bag of the specific candy she liked because I'd stopped at a gas station on the way, she looked at me like I'd done something remarkable instead of something any decent person would do. "You didn't have to bring snacks," she said, taking the bag anyway, already opening it. "You'd had a 12-hour travel day. Snacks were structurally necessary. You're using engineering metaphors for candy. I contain multitudes." She'd laughed and let me in, and we'd sat on her floor eating gummy candy at midnight while she told me about the flight delay in exhausting, hilarious detail. And somewhere around 1 in the morning I'd looked at her, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, hair a mess from travel, and thought, with a clarity that scared me, I am in serious trouble. I never said anything. There were rules, unspoken but enormous, the kind that don't need to be written down because everyone in the room already knows them. Theo's sister was off limits. Not because Theo had ever said so directly, but because some things are understood the way gravity is understood. You don't need someone to explain it to you. You just know what happens if you ignore it. So I built a very elaborate filing system in my head labeled things I notice about Ivy Marsh, but am not allowed to mention, and I kept adding to it for 3 years, and I told myself that was a sustainable long-term plan. It was not a sustainable long-term plan. The night in the kitchen cracked the filing cabinet open, and for 2 weeks after, Ivy and I orbited each other with the careful, exaggerated normalcy of two people who both knew a bomb had gone off and were trying to act like it was just a car backfiring somewhere far away. She still came to Sunday dinners. I still made too much pasta and pretended it was intentional. We still argued about condiments, about movies, about whether a hot dog was a sandwich, which was a fight we'd been having, unresolved, for 3 years. But there were new silences now, small ones, the kind where she'd start a sentence and stop, or I'd catch her looking at me, and she'd look away half a second too fast. Theo, for his part, remained gloriously oblivious, which either meant he trusted us completely or he was the least observant man alive. Knowing Theo, I suspected both were true simultaneously. It was Ivy's grandmother's 80th birthday that finally forced the issue 3 weeks after the kitchen. The whole extended Marsh family had rented out the back room of an Italian restaurant, long tables, too much wine, an uncle who insisted on giving a toast that ran 11 minutes. I was there because I'd been coming to Marsh family events for 2 years running. Ever since Theo had started introducing me as basically a cousin, a phrase that had felt like a compliment until roughly the moment Ivy said what she'd said in the kitchen, after which it felt like a life sentence. I was seated, By some accident of place cards, I'm still convinced Ivy's mother orchestrated, directly across from Ivy. She wore a green dress that made her eyes look like something you'd want to build a whole building around. And every time she reached for her wine glass, her knee brushed mine under the narrow table. And every time it happened, neither of us acknowledged it. And every time it happened again 5 minutes later. "You're staring," she said quietly, under the noise of her uncle's toast reaching its emotional climax. "I'm listening to your uncle. You are not. Your Uncle Radar is famously terrible. You once thought my dad was giving a toast when he was actually just asking someone to pass the butter. That was one time. It was formative." I looked at her properly then, across a table crowded with breadsticks and half-empty wine glasses, and I thought about the filing cabinet in my head, and I thought about how exhausted I was from keeping it locked. "Can we talk about the kitchen thing?" I said, low enough that it wouldn't carry. Ivy went still in that particular way she had, the one where her whole body seemed to brace for impact even as her face stayed perfectly composed. "Here? Now? During Uncle Frank's toast? Uncle Frank has been talking for 9 minutes. I think we have time. You want to have an emotionally significant conversation during a birthday toast. I want to stop pretending you didn't say what you said." Her jaw tightened, just slightly, the way it did right before she said something she meant instead of something she'd rehearsed. "I told you I selected you 3 years ago, Wyatt. What else is there to talk about? What it means. Whether it's still true. Whether you meant it the way I think you meant it. Or whether I've spent 3 weeks constructing an entire emotional interpretation out of one sentence you said while swiping left on a man holding a fish." The corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. "The fish guy really got to you. He's a symbol now. Answer the question." Uncle Frank finally sat down to scattered applause. The table shifted, conversation resuming its normal volume, and under the cover of it, Ivy leaned forward slightly. "I meant it exactly the way you think I meant it," she said. "I've meant it for 3 years. I just never had a good enough reason to say it out loud until you called me selective, and something in me just snapped. My heart did something inconvenient and loud. 3 years. Since the barbecue. Since you told me my grilling critique skills were, and I quote, aggressively unqualified. You told me my technique was mediocre first. It was mediocre. That's not the point. The point is I went home that night and told my roommate I'd met someone I couldn't stop thinking about, and she asked who. And I said my brother's friend, and she said absolutely not, and I said, I know. And then I spent 3 years knowing and doing nothing about it because Theo would combust. Theo would combust, I agreed. He's currently 15 feet away eating his 4th breadstick. He counts breadsticks the way some men count calories. Ivy laughed despite herself, quick and startled, the kind of laugh she gave when she'd meant to stay serious and couldn't quite manage it. Then she sobered, and something more vulnerable moved across her face. I need you to say something back, she said, because I just handed you 3 years of not saying anything. And if you don't say something back, I'm going to have to leave this table and never come to another family dinner where you're also invited, which would be a real logistical problem given that you're basically a cousin now. I hate that phrase. I know. That's why I used it. I reached across the table, past the breadsticks, past the abandoned butter dish, and took her hand. She let me. Her fingers were cold, the way they always were in restaurants because she ran cold and refused to bring a jacket anywhere on principle. I've been keeping a list, I said, in my head. Things I notice about you that I'm not allowed to mention. It's a very long list, Ivy. It has subcategories. Her breath caught. Subcategories. One is just about the way you hum when you're nervous and don't know you're doing it. I don't hum. You hummed through your entire drive here. I could hear it through the phone when you called to ask if you could park in my building's lot. Ivy's cheeks went faintly pink, visible even in the low restaurant light. That's humiliating. It's the opposite of humiliating. It's on the list. Wyatt. Yeah. If you don't kiss me sometime in the next month, I'm going to combust, and then Theo will have 2 combusted family members, and he'll never recover. I laughed, and it came out rougher than I meant it to, half nerves and half relief. A month feels aggressive. I've been patient for 3 years. A month is generous. Before I could answer, Theo's voice cut across the table, oblivious as ever. Are you two fighting about the hot dog thing again? Because I swear, if this ruins Grandma's birthday. We're not fighting, Ivy said instantly, pulling her hand back with the speed of someone who had done this before. We're discussing breadstick allocation. Theo squinted at us with the deep suspicion of a man who trusted neither the answer nor the tone in which it had been delivered, but the cake arrived at that exact moment, candles blazing, and his attention scattered to the four winds the way it always did around dessert. Ivy looked at me across the table, something bright and nervous and hopeful in her expression, and mouthed, silently, a month. I mouthed back, or sooner. She smiled like I'd handed her something. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life, because on the surface nothing changed. We still had Sunday dinners at Theo's. We still argued about condiments. Ivy still showed up unannounced with takeout and complaints about her week. But underneath the surface, everything had shifted, the way a building shifts on its foundation after an earthquake. Nothing visibly different, but every load calculation now slightly, permanently off. She started texting me things she used to only say out loud. Small things. Saw a man wearing socks with sandals today and thought of your grilling technique. I started noticing that I checked my phone differently when I knew a message might be from her. Faster, more eager, in a way I would have denied to anyone who asked. Theo noticed nothing, which felt increasingly like either a miracle or a crime. 2 weeks after the birthday dinner, Ivy called me on a Tuesday night, her voice doing the thing it did when she was trying to sound casual about something that wasn't casual at all. So she said, "There's a thing. A thing. My coworker set me up. On a date. This Friday." I sat down very slowly on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something cold and unreasonable move through my chest. "Oh." I said yes before I remembered the wholest thing. And then I panicked, and now I don't know what to do. And you're the only person I can call about this because obviously I can't call Theo, and my roommate will just say cancel it, like that's a normal, simple thing to do. Is it not a normal, simple thing to do? It's a guy named Derek. He does triathlons. My coworker's been trying to set us up for 8 months. If I cancel with no explanation, it's going to be a whole thing. I closed my eyes, and I thought about the list in my head, the subcategories, the month I'd been given, and the sooner I'd promised, and I made a decision that felt reckless even as I was making it. "Then don't cancel," I said. Silence on the other end. "What? Go on the date, Ivy. See how it feels." "Wyatt, that's insane." "Why would you say that?" "Because I don't want you to spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened with Triathlon Derek, because you canceled out of guilt about a conversation we haven't even finished having. I want you to go, and I want you to come back and tell me it was terrible, and then I want to take you on a real one so there's no comparison left to make." There was a long pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "That's either the most secure thing anyone's ever said to me," Ivy said finally, "or the most insecure thing disguised as confidence. I genuinely can't tell." "Both. It's both." She laughed, shaky and warm. "Okay, fine. I'll go. But Wyatt, if I come back and it was terrible, you don't get to gloat." "I would never." "You absolutely would. A little. Briefly. I'll allow myself 30 seconds. Friday came, and I spent it in a state I can only describe as structurally unsound. I went to work. I reviewed load calculations for a parking garage. I said to my coworker Priya at least 4 times without actually processing anything she'd said, until she finally waved a hand in front of my face and asked if I was having a stroke. "I'm fine," I told her. "Someone I like is on a date with a triathlete." Priya blinked. "That sentence has several problems." "I know. Do you want to talk about it?" "No." "Yes." "No." She bought me a coffee out of pity, which I appreciated more than I let on. By 9 that night, I hadn't heard anything, and I'd convinced myself Ivy and Triathlon Derek were somewhere having a spectacular time, probably discussing electrolyte balance and mutual admiration for each other's cardiovascular systems. while I sat on my couch pretending to watch a documentary about deep-sea creatures that I couldn't have summarized under threat of death. At 9:42, my phone buzzed. Ivy. He spent 40 minutes explaining his marathon splits. I have never wanted a sandwich more badly in my life. Relief moved through me so fast, it was almost embarrassing. Me, terrible? Ivy, catastrophic. He asked if I even lift. I said only my own body weight, in despair, and he didn't understand it was a joke. Me. I'm allowing myself 10 of my 30 seconds of gloating right now. Ivy, don't. I'm coming over. Me. It's almost 10. Ivy, I know. I need a debrief, and I need it from someone who understands sarcasm. She showed up at my apartment 20 minutes later, still in the dress she'd worn for the date, hair slightly windblown, expression somewhere between exhausted and electric. Tell me everything, I said, opening the door. He ordered for me without asking. He called it taking charge. I called it a red flag with a six-pack. She dropped onto my couch like she'd been carrying something heavy all night and had finally been allowed to set it down. It was genuinely one of the worst dates of my life, and I have a list, Wyatt. I have evidence. This ranked in the top 3. I sat beside her, close enough that her knee found mine automatically, the way it had at the birthday dinner, the way it seemed to now no matter where we were. I'm sorry it was bad, I said, and I mostly meant it. Are you? She turned her head to look at me, something sharp and amused in her expression. You don't look very sorry. I'm working very hard to look sorry. It's not going well. You're gloating. I'm allowing myself a controlled amount of gloating, as previously negotiated. Ivy laughed, and then her laugh faded into something quieter, softer, and she was looking at me in a way that made my whole chest feel like it was recalibrating. Can I tell you something? Always. The whole night, every time Derek said something wildly self-important, I kept thinking about what you would have said instead. Some line, some joke, and I kept getting annoyed that he wasn't you. She looked down at her hands. That's not fair to him. He didn't do anything wrong except be exhausting. But I sat across from a genuinely fine, if insufferable, man, and the only thing I could think about was that I would have rather been arguing with you about hot dogs. Something in me went very still and very warm at once. Ivy, I know it's fast. I know we said a month. I know Theo is going to have an entire crisis. But I don't want to wait for the sake of waiting anymore. I've been waiting 3 years. I'm tired. I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way I'd wanted to do roughly 400 times over the past 3 weeks, and hadn't let myself. I'm tired too, I said quietly. So maybe we stop being tired together. She searched my face for a second, like she was making sure I meant it, and then she closed the distance between us and kissed me. It wasn't tentative. 3 years doesn't leave room for tentative. Her hand came up to my jaw, and mine found her waist, and the whole apartment seemed to exhale around us, every careful boundary we'd built collapsing at once, quietly and completely. When we finally broke apart, her forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere. Well, she said, that settles the hot dog debate. Does it? No, but it settles literally everything else. I laughed and kissed her again, softer this time, unhurried, the kind of kiss that says we have time now instead of we might not get another chance. We have to tell Theo, I said eventually, my forehead still against hers. Ivy groaned and dropped her head onto my shoulder. Do we have to do it tonight? Can we have one night where the biggest complication is Triathlon Derek? One night, I agreed. Then we tell him. He's going to lose his mind. He's going to lose his entire mind. Worth it, Ivy said, and pulled me back down to her. We didn't tell Theo the next day or the day after that. We told ourselves we were waiting for the right moment, but really we were just enjoying the strange, private bubble of being together without anyone else's reaction complicating it. Ivy came over after work most nights that week. We cooked terrible pasta and had actual, non-metaphorical arguments about condiments, which somehow felt more romantic now than they ever had before. She fell asleep on my couch twice, curled into my side, and both times I stayed too still for too long because I didn't want to wake her. It was, in every way that mattered, the best 2 weeks of my life. It ended, as these things do, because Theo is not actually as oblivious as he pretends to be, and because Ivy left her jacket at my apartment on a Thursday and came back Friday morning to get it before work, and Theo happened to be walking his dog past my building at exactly the wrong moment. He called me 40 minutes later. I was at my desk, reviewing a structural report, when my phone buzzed with his name and a single text. Theo, my sister's jacket. Your apartment. 7 a.m. Explain. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back the only honest thing I had. Me. Can we talk tonight? In person? Theo. We're talking now, Wyatt. Me. It's a longer conversation than texting allows. Theo. It's a 2-word conversation. Are you and my sister a thing? Yes or no? I looked at the words on the screen for a long time. 3 years of careful distance, of an unspoken rule I'd never once tested, all collapsing down to a single yes or no question from the person whose opinion mattered most in this whole equation, aside from Ivy's. Me, yes. Theo, for how long? Me, officially 2 weeks. Unofficially, longer than either of us is proud of. There was a long pause. Long enough that I put my phone face down on my desk and tried to focus on the report in front of me, which had become a wall of meaningless numbers. My phone buzzed again 10 minutes later. Theo, my place. Tonight. Both of you. I need to yell at somebody, and I'd rather do it once. I called Ivy immediately. He knows, I said, the second she picked up. I know he knows, she said, her voice tight. He called me too. He used the phrase, both of you, tonight, like we're defendants. We kind of are. Don't say that. It's not helping. We arrived at Theo's apartment that evening within a minute of each other, having very obviously coordinated our timing without discussing it. The way people do when they're trying not to look like they're hiding something while doing something that looks exactly like hiding something. Theo opened the door before either of us could knock. He looked at me, then at Ivy, then back at me, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man who has rehearsed several different speeches and can't decide which one to deliver. Sit, he said. Both of you. On the couch. Together, apparently, since that's the situation now. We sat. The silence that followed was the kind that makes you aware of your own pulse. 3 years, Theo said finally. You've been sitting on this for 3 years? I didn't know for the whole 3 years, I said carefully. I knew for maybe 2. I didn't do anything about it because of me, Theo finished. Because you thought I'd combust. You're currently combusting a little. I'm allowed to combust a little. My best friend and my sister have apparently been having an entire secret emotional relationship under my nose for years, and I found out because of a jacket. It's a very nice jacket, Ivy offered weakly. That's not helping, Ivy. I know. I panicked. Theo dragged a hand down his face and dropped into the armchair across from us, some of the fight visibly leaving him. I'm not mad that it's you, he said to me, quieter now. I want to be clear about that. If it had to be anybody, I'm glad it's you. You're the only guy I've ever trusted enough to actually worry about my sister's happiness instead of just wanting to punch him on principle. That's oddly sweet, I said. Don't get used to it. I'm still getting to the mad part. He looked at Ivy. I'm mad that you didn't tell me. Both of you. I'm not some fragile houseplant. I would have figured it out eventually. I'd have preferred figuring it out from you instead of from a jacket on Wyatt's floor. We were scared, Ivy said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word. Real vulnerability breaking through the practiced deflection she usually led with. You're the most important person in both our lives, Theo. If this went badly, if we tried and it fell apart, we didn't just risk losing each other. We risked losing you too. Both of us. And that felt like too much to gamble. Theo was quiet for a moment, looking between the two of us, something shifting in his expression. That's the dumbest, most backwards logic I've ever heard, he said finally. You thought protecting me meant lying to me. That's not how this works. You don't get to make decisions about my feelings without consulting me. I'm not that fragile. You cried during the wedding montage in that phone commercial, Ivy said. That's completely different, and you know it. Is it? Yes. That commercial is emotionally manipulative, and everyone knows it. Despite the tension in the room, I felt myself smile, and beside me, Ivy did too, some of the fear draining out of both of us at once. I need you both to know, Theo said, more serious now, that if this goes badly, I am not choosing sides. I love you both equally, and I will be miserable regardless of who's technically at fault. So don't do that to me. Figure it out. Communicate. Don't make me the casualty of whatever this becomes. We won't, I said. We're serious about this, Theo, Ivy added. It's not a 2-week thing that's going to implode. I've wanted this for 3 years. I'm not walking away from it because it got complicated. Theo studied us both for a long moment, then exhaled, something in his shoulders finally relaxing. Okay, he said. Okay, fine, but I have conditions. Conditions, I repeated. 1. No details. Ever. About anything. I don't care how happy you are. I don't want to know the specifics of my best friend dating my sister. Agreed. Enthusiastically, I said. 2. You're both still coming to Sunday dinners, and it's not going to be weird, because if it's weird, I'm blaming both of you equally. Deal, Ivy said. 3. Theo pointed at me, his expression going suddenly, genuinely serious in a way that cut through all the deflecting humor of the last 10 minutes. If you hurt her, Wyatt, I will still love you, because you're my best friend, and that doesn't just turn off. But I will also never let you forget it, and I will probably still find a way to make your life difficult for at least a decade. Understood? Understood, I said, and I meant it completely. Theo looked at his sister next, his expression softening into something almost tender, an older brother expression I'd seen directed at her 100 times, but never quite like this. And if you break his heart because you got scared, he said to Ivy, I want you to remember that I watched this idiot not eat lunch for a week once because you were dating someone else, and he was too proud to admit why. Don't waste 3 years of him being an idiot for you by getting cold feet now. Ivy's eyes went bright, and she reached over and squeezed my hand, hard. I'm not getting cold feet, she said. I selected him 3 years ago. I'm not giving him back now. Theo groaned and threw a couch cushion at both of us. That's disgusting. Get out of my apartment. Go be in love somewhere I don't have to witness it. We left laughing. Ivy's hand tangled in mine the whole way down the stairs, and something in my chest felt lighter than it had in 3 years, like a load I'd been quietly, unnecessarily bearing had finally, officially, been signed off and released. The months after that were, by any reasonable measure, easy. Not without friction. Ivy and I still argued, still disagreed, still had the occasional loud, ridiculous fight about something as small as whose turn it was to pick the restaurant. But it was easy in the way that matters, in the way that means the disagreements never once threatened the foundation underneath them. We told Ivy's parents 2 weeks after Theo found out, over a dinner that involved considerably less shouting than I'd braced for, and considerably more of Ivy's mother saying finally under her breath in a way that suggested she'd known before either of us had said a word out loud. You two have been circling each other since the barbecue, she told me, refilling my wine without asking. I told Ivy's father you'd figure it out eventually. He owes me $40. You had a bet, Ivy said, mortified. Everyone had a bet, sweetheart. Even your Uncle Frank. Uncle Frank gave an 11-minute toast at Grandma's birthday. He doesn't have the attention span for a bet. He had the attention span for this one. It's been 3 years. I laughed so hard I had to set down my wine glass. And across the table, Ivy buried her face in her hands, groaning the specific groan of a woman who has just learned her entire extended family had been running an informal betting pool on her love life for 3 straight years. It wasn't all easy, though, and I don't want to pretend the next stretch was some seamless montage of hot dog arguments and stolen toothbrushes. Somewhere around the 4-month mark, Ivy came home from work with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not upset. Exactly. More like someone holding something breakable and not sure where to set it down. I got an offer, she said, standing in my kitchen doorway still in her work clothes, coat half off one shoulder. A real one. Creative director at an agency in Seattle. They want an answer in 2 weeks. I set down the pan I'd been holding, something cold moving through my chest that I recognized immediately and hated recognizing. Seattle. Seattle. That's not exactly a commute. No, she said. It's not. We stood there in the kitchen for a long moment, the pasta water starting to boil behind me, neither of us saying the thing that mattered most, which was, of course, what does this mean for us? It's a good opportunity, I said finally, because it was true, and because I refused to be the kind of man who made her career small just because it scared me. It's the kind of job you've wanted since before I knew you. It is. Ivy came further into the kitchen, dropping her bag on a chair, rubbing her hands over her face. I don't know what to do, Wyatt. 6 months ago, I would have said yes before they finished the sentence. Now I have you and Theo and my whole family here, and a life I actually like living, and I don't know how to want both things at once without feeling like I'm betraying one of them. You're not betraying anything by wanting things, I said, though my voice came out rougher than I intended. You'd be an idiot not to at least consider it. Would you come with me? The question hung there, simple and enormous. I thought about my job, the firm I'd spent 4 years building a reputation at, the parking garage I was 3 months from finishing, Theo 15 minutes away instead of a flight, Sunday dinners that had become the architecture of my entire week. I don't know, I said honestly. I want to say yes immediately, because I want you more than I want anything else. But I also don't want to say yes just to say it, and then spend 2 years quietly resenting the decision. I think I owe you the truth more than I owe you a fast answer. Ivy's eyes went bright, and for a second I thought she might cry, but she just nodded, slow and steady. That's fair, she said. That's more than fair. I'd rather have the truth slowly than a lie fast. We didn't solve it that night. We ate dinner mostly in silence, the good kind and the bad kind tangled together, and Ivy went home to her own apartment instead of staying over, which she almost never did anymore, and I lay awake feeling the exact shape of what I might be about to lose. Over the next week, we talked about it constantly and carefully, turning it over from every angle. I looked into whether my firm had any Seattle connections. They didn't, not really, though a partner mentioned a smaller outfit up there that sometimes took contract engineers. Ivy researched whether the agency would let her negotiate a hybrid arrangement, splitting time between cities for the first year. Theo, when he found out, did not combust, which surprised both of us. You're both being idiots, he told us over Sunday dinner, with the calm authority of a man who had, for once, thought something through before saying it out loud. You're treating this like it's a test of the relationship. It's not. It's just logistics. Real love survives logistics. It doesn't survive one of you pretending you don't have dreams just to keep the other person comfortable. When did you get wise? Ivy asked, half teasing, half genuinely startled. I've always been wise. You just never asked my opinion on anything that mattered before because you assumed I'd combust. You did combust. About the jacket. That was different. That was betrayal. This is just a job in Seattle. Keep some perspective. In the end, Ivy turned the offer down. Not because I asked her to, and I want to be clear about that, because I never once asked her to, but because when she sat with it honestly, she realized the job wasn't actually the thing she wanted. It was the idea of being chosen for something big that she wanted, the validation of it. And once she separated that feeling from the actual logistics of moving 400 miles away from everyone she loved, the decision got easier. I'd have gone if you'd needed me to go, I told her, the night she called to say she'd turned it down. I want you to know that. I wasn't hoping you'd say no. I know, Ivy said. That's exactly why I could say no honestly instead of out of guilt. You gave me the room to actually choose, instead of just talking me into staying. That's the whole difference, Wyatt. 2 months later, the agency called again with a counteroffer, a director role at their Portland satellite office, smaller but real, and Ivy took it without a second's hesitation, because this time the choice wasn't between her career and her people. It was just, finally, the right job in the right city, and she didn't have to give up anything to get it. By spring, Ivy had a drawer at my apartment. By summer, I'd started leaving my toothbrush at hers without either of us commenting on it, the way things simply become normal when they're supposed to be. We still argued about hot dogs. I'm on record now as having conceded, under extreme duress, that the sandwich argument might have more nuance than I originally allowed, though I maintain publicly that I have not fully switched sides. Theo, for his part, adjusted with the speed and grace of a man who had spent 3 years subconsciously expecting this exact outcome without letting himself admit it. He started including and Wyatt in family group chats automatically, like it had always been that way. He once introduced me to a stranger at a barbecue as my brother-in-law, a full year before Ivy and I got engaged, and when I pointed out the technical inaccuracy, he just shrugged and said, "I'm not wrong. I'm early." He was right. He was just early. The proposal happened almost exactly 1 year after the birthday dinner where Ivy first told me she'd selected me 3 years earlier. Same restaurant, though not intentionally at first. I'd booked it because it was her favorite and only realized the anniversary of it 2 days beforehand, at which point I decided the universe had done half my planning for me and I might as well lean into it. I asked Theo's permission, mostly as a formality, mostly because I already knew what he'd say. "Finally," he said, echoing his mother almost exactly. "I already owe your future father-in-law money on the timeline. Don't make me lose the bet twice." There was a second bet. There's always a second bet, Wyatt. Welcome to the family. We sat at the same table, the same green dress. She still owned it, still wore it on occasions she wanted to feel a particular kind of confident. The same breadsticks between us, though this time Uncle Frank wasn't there to give an 11-minute toast, for which I remained deeply grateful. "This feels familiar," Ivy said, glancing around the restaurant with a small, knowing smile. "Are we recreating a crime scene?" "We're recreating the scene of the best thing that ever happened to me," I said, slightly different framing. That's a very smooth answer for a man who once described his own grilling technique as defensible, at minimum. "I contain multitudes." She laughed, and I reached into my jacket pocket, and when I got down on one knee beside our table, the whole restaurant went quiet in that specific, collective way restaurants do when they realize what's happening. Quiet the way that kitchen had gone quiet 3 years and 1 year ago. Quiet in a way that meant everything that mattered was about to be said out loud. "You told me once that you selected me 3 years before I had any idea," I said, my voice unsteady in a way I didn't bother hiding. "I've spent the years since trying to prove I was worth the wait. I don't know if I've managed it, but I know I don't want to spend the rest of my life finding out without you next to me while I try. Ivy Marsh, will you marry me?" She had both hands pressed over her mouth, eyes bright, nodding before she could even get the word out, and when she finally did say it, "Yes, obviously, yes," the whole restaurant erupted into applause, and somewhere in my peripheral vision I caught our waiter wiping his eyes with his apron, and none of it mattered nearly as much as the way Ivy pulled me up and kissed me like the entire restaurant, the whole world, had simply stopped existing around the two of us. "You planned this on our anniversary," she said, when we finally broke apart. Breathless, both of us laughing for no reason except joy. "You absolute romantic disaster." "I didn't plan it. I noticed it. There's a difference." "Is there?" "I've been telling myself that for a year. Let me have it." We got married the following autumn, in Ivy's parents' backyard, under string lights her mother had insisted on for 3 separate reasons that all somehow contradicted each other. Theo was my best man. He gave a toast that ran, in a stunning show of family tradition, exactly 11 minutes, and included the phrase, "I found out about this relationship because of a jacket, and now I'm giving away." Well, not giving away, she'd murder me for the phrasing, but supporting my sister at her wedding to my best friend, and honestly, if you'd told 22-year-old me this is how it would go, I'd have said you were out of your mind, and then I'd have quietly hoped you were right. Ivy cried. I cried. Even Uncle Frank cried, which nobody expected, least of all Uncle Frank, who spent the reception loudly insisting it was allergies. Now, 3 years married, 6 years, if you count from the barbecue, which Ivy insists we do, on the grounds that the timeline started when I started noticing, not when we admitted it. We still argue about hot dogs. We still argue about condiments. Ivy still hums when she's nervous, and I still notice every single time. Filed now not under a secret list of things I wasn't allowed to say, but out loud, casually. The way you mention any small true thing about the person you love. Last month at Theo's own engagement party, to a woman he swears he did not meet through us, though the timeline is suspiciously convenient. Ivy leaned over during dinner and said, quietly, just for me, you know, I still think about that night in the kitchen. Swiping left on the fish guy. I think about it every day, I said. It's the best thing you ever said to me. Better than I do. Different category. That's the sequel. The kitchen thing was the whole premise. She smiled the way she'd smiled that first night, bright and a little dangerous, and reached over to steal a piece of bread off my plate without asking. The same way she'd been stealing food off my plate for 6 years running. For the record, she said, I'd select you again. Every time. No swiping required. Good, I said, and kissed her, right there at the table, in front of her entire extended family, none of whom so much as blinked, because by now, 6 years in, we weren't the surprising part of any family gathering anymore. We were just, finally, the expected one. Sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet and Ivy's already asleep with her hand curled loosely against my chest the way it always ends up no matter how far apart we start, I think back to that fish guy swipe. That offhand accusation, you're too selective, and how close I came to never finding out what she meant by her answer. It would have been easy to let her brush it off that night in Theo's kitchen. It would have been easy to fold the moment into the enormous stack of things I'd already decided not to say. I think about that a lot. Actually, how many good things in a life come down to one small refusal to let a sentence go unfinished, one decision to ask instead of assume, to stay instead of retreat behind a joke. I don't know if I'd call myself brave for asking. Mostly I think I was just tired, the way she said she was tired of filing feelings away in a cabinet that was never going to hold them forever. But I've come to believe that most love stories aren't started by the brave ones. They're started by the tired ones. The people who finally run out of room to keep pretending and say the true thing out loud because the alternative, silence, has simply gotten too heavy to carry one more day. Ivy selected me 3 years before I ever said a word back. I like to think, if I'm honest, that some quieter part of me had selected her long before I let myself admit it too. Somewhere around a burnt hot dog and a ridiculous argument about grilling technique. Or maybe later, on a floor at midnight, eating gas station candy and watching her laugh about a delayed flight like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anyone. I just needed a woman brave enough, or tired enough, to say it first. What would you have done if your best friend's sister told you she'd selected you 3 years before you ever said a word? Have you ever waited years to say something out loud because you were scared of what it might cost you? Tell your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.